Hello, today on this lecture we will take a look at a problem that will be very similar to the homework and or assignment. The numbers will change, the format will remain much the same. Here is the problem that we will work in. We'll be using an Excel worksheet like this, which can be used both on this problem as well as on the related problem with different numbers. It's going to be good to use the Excel sheet even if the problem is in Connect. I would put it in Excel first, then transfer the numbers into Excel into Connect for multiple reasons. Excel is easier to do calculations if there's longer calculations, easier to see formulas and where the numbers are going to and how items are related within the spreadsheet. Also good to know Excel in order to just format anything even outside of the accounting department. And if you need to work the problem again, it will be easier if you had done so in Excel. Okay, so let's take a look at the problem. After the success of the company's first 2 months, Sandy Ray continues to operate business solutions. The November 30th, 2015 unadjusted trial balance of business solutions reflects its transactions for October and November of 2015 as follows. So the first thing we're going to do is some good old data input. We're going to put the trial balance into our worksheet over here. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to put it on this side. I'm going to go to the worksheet over here. We're going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to hide some of these rows because I'm going to try to work with one row right next to trial balance at a time. So in order to hide, if you want to do this, you don't have to, but if you want to, you go to the E where it looks like this, not like this. The cursor should look like this, not like that, but like that. Left click and drag to, I'm going to go to I, let go the selected area, right click on the selected area and hide. Okay, so then I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it on this side till it snaps. So we have this on this side and this on this side. I'm going to change the size of this to, I don't know, 70, how about 100? And then we're just going to put this information into our trial balance over here. So I have the blue cells and we're just going to put this information in. If we get it in there correctly, I'm going to combine the two cells rows together in that credits are going to be represented with bracketed or negative numbers in order to save space, and hopefully that will become apparent as we do this, why we would want to do that, and knowing how the debits and credits are formatted within different programs is really useful to know. So anyways, cash 39064, accounts receivable 13118, and of course we're out of balance down here until we get through to the whole thing. Then we've got computer supplies 2545 1860 2940 8400 2800 0000. I'm on the capital account, so that's good. That's a credit, so I'm going to put a negative number, 64000. So I'm representing credits in the credit column with negative numbers. And then we got a debit of 6,000, a credit for income, negative 36344, then a 00, and then on wages we have 2300, and then a 0 and a 0 and a 0. And then on advertising, looks like we're lining up, we have 1708 debit, 684 debit, 160 debit, 765 debit. If you don't see green zeros down here, go back through. It has to work because the debits and the credits are in balance. Therefore, if we represent the credits as negatives, credits represented by brackets in this case, then the debits minus the credits must equal 0. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to just find the difference. And it's good practice just to see that, see what accounts are credits, what accounts are debits, and then we can work on the relationship between them. Alright, so then we're going to take a look at the transactions down here. See if we can make this a little larger. Okay, so then we have the business solution, had the following transactions as of December 15th. Paid 1,010 cash to Hillside Mall for business solutions share of the mall advertising costs. So we have 12.2. We paid something. So first question is always, is cash affected? In this case, it is. We paid cash. Cash is up here. It has a debit balance. We're going to make it go down because we paid it by doing the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. Credits generally go on the bottom, so I'm going to copy that. Right click on B7 and paste it 1, 2, 3, meaning I'm pasting the values only rather than changing the cell colors. I'm pasting the value only. Going to represent that by a credit of negative 1010. If I credit something and there's only 2 accounts affected, we're also going to have to debit something for that amount as well. And what are we doing here? Paying for advertising. So if we look at our total trial balance and we look for something related to advertising, we can see down here we have an advertising expense. That would make sense. It's an expense. We can see all the expenses here have debit balances, and we generally only expenses only go up in the debit direction. So that means that we're going to have to debit the expense again in order to do the same thing to it in order to make it go up. We already knew that because we credited cash, so that would make sense. So we're going to debit the expense. The debits generally go on top, so I'm going to paste that 1, 2, 3 here. Then I'm going to post this in kind of a shorthanded way. Rather than post it to the trial balance, what we're going to do now is just show the sum of all our posts in these entries column, and therefore we'll have the beginning plus the transaction here. So let's do this and see if this is making sense. We're going to go to M6. I'm just going to say equals. I'm going to scroll over to the cash, which is the credit in D7. Then when I hit enter, it'll go from here up in the, down in the debit direction. Down from a debit to the credit direction. So it's going from 39 debit to 38.54 debit. And then we're going to go down to the advertising expense down here in cell M27 equals. I'm going to point to the advertising. And once we hit this, the advertising, that's a debit. This is a debit. That's going to make this go up, put us back in balance. Net income will go down. And notice net income is, and let's do that. Net income goes down. Notice net income is a credit in this worksheet. That doesn't mean it's a loss in this case. It means that the credits of revenue are beating the debits of expenses. And remember, how do we calculate net income? Revenue minus expenses means that we have a 29,717 credit now, and that's income, net income. Okay, so now we're on the next one. So on 12.3, paid $430 cash for minor repairs to the company's computer. So once again, is cash affected? Yeah, we paid cash. Cash is a debit balance. We're going to make it go down by doing the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. Going to put the credit on the bottom, pasting it 1, 2, 3, and the credit is for, in this case, negative 430. If we credit something, we're also going to have to debit something. What are we going to debit? For minor repairs. So if we look at our whole thing here, that sounds like an expense too. It's down here in the repairs expense area. Notice that expenses, we already know we're going to debit it now, right? Because we credited cash. All the expenses have debit balances. They only go up. If we debit a debit, we're doing the same thing to it. If we do the same thing to something as what it is, it makes it go up, which makes sense. The expense is going to go up, bringing net income down. So let's see if that's the case. I'm going to post the cash first. In order to do that, I'm going to double click on the cash. So I'm going to double click and go to the end of it. I can see that's in there now. I'm going to go to the end of it and say plus and point to the credit in cash. That's a debit, that's a credit. That's going to make the debit balance go down because it's doing the opposite thing to it. And we're now out of balance by 430. Going to go to the M30 cell equals, and we're going to go to the debit of 430, making the debit go up by a debit, increasing, putting us back in balance. That'll bring net income down. So there we have that transaction. Then we're going to go to 12.4. Received $4,350 cash from Alex's engineering company for the receivable from November. So is cash affected? Yes, in this case we received cash. So we got more cash. Cash is a debit balance. We need to make it go up this time. How do we make something go up? We do the same thing to it as what it is. That's a debit. We're going to make it go up with another debit. So I'm going to debit that account for 4350. Going to credit something for 4350. And why did we get cash? It's not because we earned the revenue now. We earned the revenue sometime in the past. Now they're paying us off for what we did when we earned the revenue. So we already recognize the revenue. We're not going to credit revenue. We're going to credit accounts receivable. Accounts receivable being the IOU, the amount that people owe us. They have now paid us. Therefore, this amount should go down. We're going to credit it. That's a debit balance. If we credit it, we're doing the opposite thing to it. If we do the opposite thing to it as what it is, that will make it go down. So that makes sense that that is a credit. And then we can post this. I'm going to double click on the cash again, go to the end of it, say plus, and then point to the cash of the 4350 and enter. So that goes up. We're out of balance here. Going to go to the receivable, enter, equals, and then I'm going to scroll down here to cell D13. That's a debit, that's a credit. They're opposites. Therefore, the debit balance is going to go down, puts us back in balance. No effect on net income because, once again, we didn't earn it this time. We earned it in the past, already recording the revenue when earned. 12.10. paid cash to Lynn for 6 days of work at the rate of $115 per day. All right, is cash affected? Yes, we paid with cash. Cash is a debit balance. We're going to make it go down by doing the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. So we're going to credit cash, and I'm going to do the formula with a negative so that it has a credit. 115 times 6 days. So we have 690. That means we're going to have to debit something 690. Why did we pay out the 690? We paid wages. And we see wages in the expense area. Wages is an expense. We see that we're debiting something. We're going to have to debit wages. Wages is an expense. Expenses have debit balances. They only go up. Therefore, the debit would make sense because it's the same thing as what it is, and it will make the expense go up, bringing net income down, net income calculated by income minus expenses. So if we post that, I'm going to post the cash first again, even though it's on the bottom. Double clicking on the cash, going to the end of it. We can see what's in there right now. I'm going to say plus, point to the credit in cash, and enter. We're now out of balance by the 960. We're going to go to the wages expense here in M23 equals, and scroll up to the debit. That's a debit, that's a debit. It's going to make it go up in the debit direction, put it back in balance, and bring net income down. Okay, so then we're going to go to 1214, which says notified by the engineer that Business Solutions bid of $8,000 on proposed project has been accepted. Alex has paid $1,008 cash advance to Business Solutions. All right, so is cash affected? Yeah, we paid cash in this case. Cash is the debit balance. We're going to make it go down by doing the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a credit. So we're going to credit cash for, and we're only going to credit it for the 1800. Notice the bid is kind of tricky. We got a bid, but we haven't earned the money yet, so that's good. There's no transaction related to the bid. There is a transaction related to this cash that was paid. I'm sorry, the cash was received. Should be up here. Received the cash on, so we received the cash up front for the bid that we sent in. So we bid on a job, they gave us a down payment already. So we're going to have to credit something here. So we debited cash to increase the cash, and then we're going to have to credit something. And you would think we'd credit revenue because we got a job, but we haven't earned the revenue yet. So we're not going to increase the credit of revenue with another credit until we earn it. What we're going to do instead is increase a liability, that liability being unearned revenue. Why? Because at this point in time, we owe someone something, either the work to be done, or we got to give them their money back, right? The other one of the two is what we owe in the future for that cash we received at this time. So let's see what happens to the transaction. I'm going to double click on the cash, go to the end of it, plus the 18. That's going to make cash go up. We received cash on the bid, and then I'm going to go to cell M17 equals, and then scroll over to the credit in D19, and that will make the liability go up. Notice liabilities have a credit balance. That's a credit, meaning it went up in the credit direction. So then we're going to go to to the date of 12/15. Purchase 2,000 of computer supplies on credit from Harris Office Products. So is cash affected? In this case, the answer is no. We purchased it on credit. Now, if we purchased it on credit, we know that we put it into a liability, being accounts payable. But it's kind of harder to think about a liability sometimes. It might be easier to think about what we received in terms of should we debit or credit it. We received, in this case, computer supplies, which we can see up here. And it's similar to cash in that it's an asset. We know we got more of it. We know the asset has a debit balance, and we know that it went up. So therefore, we're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which in this case would be another debit. So since we're really used to debiting cash, which is an asset, it might be easier to think about the asset rather than the liability first. And then say, okay, then we're going to have to credit something. So obviously, if the other account is accounts payable, we would then have to credit accounts payable. Does that make sense? Well, accounts payable is a liability. Liabilities are here. They all have credit balances. We need to make the bad thing go up. How do we make something go up? We do the same thing to it as what it is. Therefore, we're going to have to credit the credit balance account in order to make it go up. So it does make sense that that is the case. So let's do that and see if it does what we think it should do. So we're then going to go to the cell M8 equals, scroll down to the debit here, and that's a debit, that's a debit. It's going to make this go up in the debit direction. Then we will go to the accounts payable equals and scroll over to the credit. That's a credit. That's a